asking for a little clarity around the redevelopment scheme, the new neighborhood. So if you could imagine coming through University Circle, where Case University Hospital is, and you see storefronts. On top of the storefronts, you'll see apartments. Behind the structures, they'll go into more apartments or houses or row houses. We're envisioning all of the above in this new neighborhood. A very mixed use scheme, and that's a redevelopment of an entirely new neighborhood.
I did not hear anything about redevelopment. Can you elucidate on your plans or goals, objectives for redevelopment in the city? We destroyed all our revenue, but there is nothing to enhance it. So I want to know from you, what are your plans for redevelopment?
There we go, man.
I do not think it speaks well for us as a people that we cannot operate and manage a city, that we got to annex our city. I remember our foreparents. Let me just, my question is,
Go ahead, go.
I mean, if you stop, I can answer, ask my question, please. Please, this is not necessary.
I don't want to hear your questions.
Please, let him go, let him go, let him go. Go. Please, with your question.
My question is this, Mr. Mayor. Are you for annexation, and you encouraging annexation of what? That is my question.
Good question. Good question.
Okay, the power went out. We've covered annexation and we've covered development and redevelopment. Are there any other questions?
You can start off with Cassandra. What was your opinion on what you thought of Cassandra?
Well, I think that he definitely has some good points, but I'm still concerned because there's not a comprehensive plan per se. And also, when it comes to the land bank and owning the property, I'm concerned about the creation of blight all over again, because the land bank will have control of that land. So that's a concern.
What about you?
One of the things I'm concerned about is, as I looked at the slides that showed the new development that is going to be taking place, I wonder what happened to the displaced people who were living there. And I've thought many times about my concerns about gentrification. And how do we weave a network that includes the people who've invested 30, 40 years in this community into a new development? So what happens throughout the entire city, with East Cleveland only being 3.5 square miles, the plan has to be comprehensively developed that includes the entire community and not just part of the community. Another thing I'm also concerned about is relative to this construction. How many people, minority people, are going to be written into this process so that we're not just looking for jobs, but we're looking for ownership?
Right.
That's 3.5 square miles. That's part of the 3.5 square miles, which is East Cleveland, is ours. So if we're not the ones that's going to do the work, and at the end of the day we see all these beautiful buildings here and we don't have anything but jobs, we haven't gained anything by our leadership here. Right. So hopefully they'll come up with more as we move toward the election, but those are my thoughts for today.
Okay, well, this is my comment / question. From what I saw was an overabundance of demolishing and tearing down and rebuilding properties.
I agree.
But there was no economic plan on how the existing community.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So
that's why I think
here's the problem. You cannot have community development without economic development, because it won't work. That's the first thing. The second thing is they're only looking at market-based value of property when there's also historic components, and also a lot of properties that they're saying they're going to demolish doesn't necessarily need to be demolished. They can rehab them for other things that we need in the community, such as recreation centers. We can use them for educational purposes, for things like that. So in reality, when they're spending the funds on these demolition projects, They already said that they're in a $2.8 million deficit. Well, how are you going to come out of that deficit if you're tearing down these properties, but again, you have no income that regenerates itself?
Right.
So that's an issue.
Well, that last point, I think he was saying maybe the federal funding may cover it since
Well,
it's not a
here's the problem with the federal funding. Even take aside from the historical aspect of it. He said about the CDBG funds. The problem is, where's your grant writers? Because you're only relying on those funds when you have to start looking at outside resources to get more money in. So again, it's almost like the effort will, in the long run, defeat itself because I don't see how they're coming out on top with that.
And when you start hearing words like mixed income, that is a red flag.
Let me tell you.
Because mixed income, it never works.
It never works.
And
What mix are you talking about?
Let me tell you, urban studies, planning and development is my background.
Okay.
And exactly like you said, mixed communities do not work because your income variables, your educational variables, and all of those come into play. And it will not work, especially when you look at the population density within East Cleveland. That is not the type of community. Exactly.
The class will be the people that have the money and the people that have been living there.
Yes.
The class they won't understand each other. So there's the community aspect.
Right.
And then what you were saying in the first place is that when you see homes being torn down rapidly, instead of rehabbing them, they're usually tearing them down so they can rebuild up something that costs a lot more.
A lot of more money, right?
Instead of taking these homes and finding an economic way to sell them to generate taxes at a level that people can afford with low incomes, because if all you have to do is pay the taxes on this house for so many years and you're forced to renovate it within so many years, it does bring the housing stock up the city, and it includes everybody. So the rising tide will lift everybody's boat, instead of looking to basically, because when I looked at it, the first thing I thought was, and I asked Cassandra, where are the people that used to live there?
Right, because here's what we're seeing. We're seeing the exchange. We're seeing the reverse of white flight. That's exactly what's happening, like it did in 1960, where the outskirts, the metropolitan areas were being built up, but it's for a different reason than what it is now. Before, the white people were moving away from the cities because they were saying that the black population was increasing. Well, it's happening in the reverse now. They're letting the suburbs have the black population, and the metropolitan area, which East Cleveland is definitely considered that because of the proximity to downtown. That's what they're doing. So that's why the property is as such, and like you said, the mixed communities will definitely not work.
And I'm releasing this video tomorrow if you guys want to see it on the bike lanes. Bike lanes are going to start coming out when you see them everywhere. Yeah, when you see, especially even from Superior, from the east side, Superior turns to Detroit on the west side.
Right.
It's one straight bike lane, and they're going to give grants and money and stuff to arts and cultural programs.
That's the wave. Yes.
And instead of in the existing community,
that's what they
it's
did
going
to
to
the
be
Detroit Shoreway.
Yeah, they're turning it into a creative city. So the bike lanes are going to pop up. The museum, in fact, the historic museum on Euclid was just brought earlier today.
Yep.
By Arkansas.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Well, it just goes to show you that we're fortunate in one sense that East Cleveland is 3.5 square miles of land.
Yes.
We're fortunate in the fact that it is still our land. It is also our obligations that we owe to our ancestors to make sure that we continue to keep it our land.
So how can we, because this is the common theme, is that the developers and politicians, they don't see the people as an investment, because drugs, poverty, crime, and different things. How can we, I guess, is it too late, or is it even possible for them to see that these people can be worth proper investment?
You know what I think it is? It's a combination of things. First of all, you got to look at who you're electing. When they're too far removed, they're not going to understand your issues, and we don't elect people based on what we've seen them do in the communities prior to being elected. That's the first thing. The second thing is, it's not necessarily that they don't know. A lot of them don't want to, because of the fact of what they are getting out of it in terms of being able to keep their seats and so forth, because their hands are, they work with the CDCs, they do things with these investors and so forth. So I think one of the ways to eradicate that basically is it goes back to the community. I don't think that we, as a community, provide for ourselves in a sense that we are able to sustain ourselves. And I think that's one of the things that we need to start coming up with, getting our own co-ops, our markets, our banks, our credit unions, our things like that. How do we do it? Well, we got to start thinking about how do we get the small business loans? How do we, get investors to invest in us with the same plan? So those are some of the suggestions.
I agree, and I think too it's important that we begin to write our own narrative. All of the information that comes to us, other than places like yourself, which are far and few in between, everybody's perception of us in Cuyahoga County is based around a news media who has continued to build this propaganda for a number of years. So the first thing that comes out of a person's mouth, they don't see East Cleveland as a chance of a lifetime. They see it as a crime-ridden place that should just be wrote off. And that's important for people to understand.
I shared that video. Watch on the Black on Black crime video. The first video of my gentrification series is called Territorial Stigmatization.
Bingo.
And that's basically the role we play in glorifying poverty, violence, and crime, rap music, shows, and ghetto and stuff.
Please say something to that, because what you just said is exactly why Jim Rokakis, I did not like it when he came into East Cleveland and did that tour, because think about it, he's with the land banks, he's involved in that, but then he's going to do a tour in East Cleveland to market the poverty here in order for him to benefit.
And that's what I gave a case in Australia where the politicians, they paid $1,000 a week to catch a ferry so they didn't have to walk through this estate. And there's a lot of examples I gave. It's in London. They call it sinking estates. There's different names for different ghettos and stuff all across the world. They had a movie there filmed, like the Attack the Block movie. It was filmed in the Ellsbury Estates. The Channel 4 News, they did it where it was like ghetto and grimy to show their station. So they were there. Everyone is all invested. There was a show in Australia and people they said, you can't film movies or anything here unless it projects us in a positive light.
Right.
And this is the examples I'm trying to show.
And that's exactly what it is. Because that narrative has been created over some time. So,
and we play a role in that.
Yes, we do.
Because we're born into it.
That's
exactly.
Right. That's right.
Exactly.
So it's going to be up to us.
Yeah.
Because the way that I see this in the final analysis, if we don't fix this with this upcoming election, there will be no East Cleveland by the end of 2018.
It has to be done now.
So in regards to your plan, your redevelopment plan or whatever, would you say rebuilding and the high rises and different things, would you say that is I don't want to say the only, but is that the main focus for generating funds for the city to rebuild the city?
So what happens when you think about redevelopment or development of a city? You got to start with the people, of course, churches, and then once you have a condensed amount of people in an area, businesses will come in, right? You'll get a grocery store, you'll get a dry cleaner, you'll get a gas station because the people are there and they can support the businesses. So that's one aspect of it. When you get over to the industrial manufacturing, that's another aspect. Because again, once you get enough people congregated in a certain area, you will attract light manufacturing. You will attract companies, right? Particularly if the people who are congregated in that area have the capacity to fill those jobs, whether it's computer jobs or box making, whatever the job may be.
Okay. So what about investing in the local, I guess, existing residents that aren't going to be, not the residents that are to come, the residents are here? Is there any plan for developing investment for the residents that are already here, as far as economically?
If you think back into the presentation, right, and thoroughly maybe even watch it on the tube, and understand that everything I talked about was for the residents here. So if you look at the new neighborhood in which we had a rendering of, right, And here's that new neighborhood. Here's a rendering of it. So imagine we congregate 400 to 600 new units here, right? Imagine that the income of the occupants, right? Let's just assume that you got 2 people per unit, right? Imagine the income high enough so that it can impact the services and the delivery of those services, not just here, but across the entire city. So when you ask, am I thinking about, or what am I doing for the other residents, all of this is about the residents.
Yes, I understand.
It's about the residents.
But, as we were discussing after the meeting, when there's words like mixed income and different things like that, people think of gentrification.
So I wouldn't necessarily use the word gentrification. Keep in mind, and it's been well articulated over and over, the city was built out for about 40,000. And at this point, we've got about 17,000 people here. We have space. We have space.
Okay, and last question, is there any way to attract, I guess, not developers, but maybe investors that will invest in the residents that are already here, besides through property, besides real estate?
I would need more detail on that question, because I'm not really sure what you're asking.
Like, I'm saying, because we're discussing real estate and the housing and different things, are there any other alternative means or any other in addition to for the residents that are already here?
From a city's perspective, we have a number of federal programs, the home program, emergency repair program. So we have those government programs, I'm not sure it's specifically what you're asking, because if a resident wanted to fix up their house outside
I'm
of
not
those
talking
two,
about how. I'm not just talking about housing. I'm mainly saying
The areas in which we're marketing with CBRE for industrial.
for the residents that are already here. Because you're saying that the housing.
to fix up their houses.
No, I'm not talking about housing. The question I asked you before, you were saying that the new housing, you have space, like you said, to develop new housing that'll bring up the economic growth and it will attract new businesses and different things. My question is, in addition to that, is there something else for the residents that are already here that is not housing related?
Yeah,
Like for example, a developer that maybe wanted to set up a manufacturing industry for residents right now. Just an example.
Absolutely. So we've had discussions with CBRE, which is the largest industrial real estate servicing firm in the world, right? In regards to attracting light commerce, right? There are a number of options that we talked about with them bringing in, and a number of areas around the city that we spoke about in particular that we would like to see some light manufacturing, or maybe an office building, or an incubator, or computer manufacturing. Keep in mind, we've had a number of small manufacturers leave the city. So we have land available for that as well.
And is there a way to attract them? Because I remember
So that's why we're working with
Wheeler.
CBRE. So what has to happen, given the resources of the city, that we need help. We need to form partnerships with people. And one of those excellent partnerships we have right now is with the Cuyahoga County Land Bank. So I got some people leaving.
Okay.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your
All
time.
right.